What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, February 9th, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you right on the air. And let's just get right on into it here. The Senate has confirmed Jeff Sessions as the new Attorney General, despite all of the children, liberals in Congress, trying to put up a big stink about it. And, of course, this is signaling a dramatic shift in the Justice Department's approach to issues ranging from relations with local police to immigration enforcement to election fraud, not to mention investigations into corruption and a certain weak email server that needs to be looked at very, very closely. Now, up in Detroit, they're already claiming that, no, there was no election fraud here. It was just all mistakes by the overworked staff, and they just did all these incredibly dumb mistakes that all seem to favor Hillary Clinton. So we don't know what all the fuss about election fraud is going on here. Now, then, as you know, Elizabeth Warren actually was silenced by the Senate for violating Rule 19 of the Senate, impugning a fellow senator, meaning Senator Sessions, and she's been silenced yet again because, as it turns out, a video surfaced of Martin Luther King's wife thanking Senator Sessions for the Rosa Parks Library. So this idea that Martin Luther King's wife was opposed to him is kind of ridiculous, and they were screaming that he's a racist, he's a racist, he's a racist, so forth and so on. And also a reminder, the NAACP gave Jeff Sessions their Governmental Award of Excellence back in 2009. So this whole thing about racism, what is a racist? Anybody who wins an argument with a liberal is immediately called a racist. So Senator Sessions is going to resign his seat in the Senate to become the new Attorney General. And, of course, he is Senator from Alabama. And a replacement senator is appointed by the governor of the state of Alabama, who is Robert J. Bentley, who is also a Republican. So this will probably not change the makeup of the Senate in terms of the party politics issue here. Now, we're still waiting for the Ninth Appeals Court to rule on the stay on Donald Trump's travel moratorium from these specific countries, and this list of countries was put together by George W. Bush and Barack Obama. It is not, contrary to what the corporate media is trying to spin on out there, a Muslim ban. Because if you're coming from one of these countries, doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, Pastafarian, Scientologist, you're going to have the same degree of difficulty getting into this country while they set up a vetting process. And, of course, they're trying to scream, it's racist, it's discriminatory, and there's really no danger of terrorism from these countries anyway. The White House has just released a list to Fox News containing the names of 24 refugees who came from these 7 countries who have been charged with terrorism here in the United States of America, proving that Donald Trump was correct all along. So, and amazingly enough, over in Syria, President Assad is saying, yes, we know many of the people leaving Syria heading for the United States of America are definitely terrorists. Now, Rand Paul is out there. He's, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to go ahead and do a quick phone call. Bob in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just got a comment and a question. One, Ivanka Trump, if she's listening, she needs to take a page from Benjamin Netanyahu's playbook, the Israelis' playbook, and claim anti-Semitism by Nordstrom and all these other stores that are canceling her fashion line. I think that might work. I mean, it works for Bibi. It might work for her.
Yeah, it might actually. But and again, the problem I have with this is whether you like Trump or not, it's hands off the family. Okay?
Absolutely.
Even the mafia agrees with that one. You know, you deal with the person who is your business or political opponent. You don't go after the families. That's just over the line there. Okay?
She did convert, so she could claim anti-Semitism.
That's true.
Mike, actually, two quick questions. One, what did Gorsuch actually say about? He said he was disheartened by Trump's comments on judges.
Well, Gorsuch was basically coming from the position of Trump crossing a line by criticizing the judges at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. But Trump has a valid point in that the letter of the law is very clearly set forth in Title VIII that gives the president the authority to say certain classes of people are not going to be allowed to come into this country, and it's been used by the last 5 presidents, including Barack Obama. Nobody kicked up a fuss then. It's only because it's Donald Trump doing it that, you know, oh, it's horrible, it's racist, it's discriminatory, it's this, it's that.
And Jimmy Carter did it as well, right? He applied it to the Iranians.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, I mean, I just hope Trump didn't nominate another David Souter. I pray he did not nominate another David Souter.
You know, Gorsuch may have just shot his Supreme Court slot down because I think Trump can ask him to withdraw his name. Or
yeah, I was thinking of the same thing. I was wondering, could Trump withdraw his name from the court?
I'm not sure of the fine points here, but I'm pretty sure that a president can change his mind and say, I want to have a different nominee now.
Yeah. Last question, Mike. What are the logistics? You were talking about the incoming president of Ecuador. He's going to refuse to allow Assange to remain in the embassy in London. What are the logistics? How would it work if another embassy decided to give Assange asylum in their building? How would he get to their building? I mean, is their car considered sovereign territory? I'm a little confused. Like, how does it get from point A to point B in London?
Yeah, you are correct. You are correct. You are any official vehicle of the Ecuadorian embassy or any other embassy is considered part of their sovereign territory, and I mean they have to comply with the local traffic laws and everything. But if, for example, Russia were to send a diplomatic car to the Ecuadorian embassy and pick up Julian Assange, then once he's in that car, he's on Russia's sovereign territory, and the British police can't do anything about it. Now, this Ecuadorian candidate, and it's assumed he's going to win the election, but he's not the president yet. But apparently one of the reasons he's very angry is because WikiLeaks exposed the fact that he was working as an informant for U.S. intelligence some years ago. So he may still be under direct control of U.S. intelligence agencies, or he may just be out for a little payback. But my understanding is that if another country were to send an official diplomatic vehicle into the Ecuadorian embassy, Assange could get in and be driven away without being touched by the local police.
Okay, perhaps they have an underground garage, or whoever, the Ecuadorian car, or the for the sake of argument, the Russian car would pick him up from that point and then take him to their embassy.
Wouldn't even need to do that. The Russian car could simply pull into the driveway in front of the entrance to the embassy. That's all considered Ecuadorian sovereign territory, and Assange could just walk on out and get in the car and be driven off.
But we had that attempt where he was outside, or there was that person on the climbing the embassy building, the Ecuadorian building.
Yes.
Thinking maybe he was trying to make an attempted assassination on Assange. If Assange is walking out toward a car, he's still potential target of a sharpshooter.
Well, you're absolutely right, but we were talking in the context of diplomatic relations, and you're right, Assange would probably be safer undercover. And I don't know the situation regarding parking at the Ecuadorian embassy, but Assange could wear a bulletproof vest and a helmet, or he could simply come out with 5 or 6 people dressed identically so that a sharpshooter wouldn't know which target to engage. That would be another way of dealing with that.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, Rand Paul is taking a firm stance over this suggestion that Elliott Abrams might be appointed to the Deputy Secretary of State. And Rand Paul is very upset. He's concerned that Elliott Abrams, with his dark past going all the way back to that CIA gun and cocaine running operation in Arkansas in the mid-1980s, is just going to open the door and let the neocons come on in. And, of course, William Crystal is out there saying, oh, you're just being an anti-Semite. You only hate Elliott Abrams because he's Jewish. You're a Jew hater. The usual thing here. Now, there may be something else going on here. Trump comes across as a bit of a buffoon, but I think it's a deliberately cultivated image. Because people who are exceptionally intelligent learn early on to kind of hide it. Because otherwise people start getting defensive and they can get hostile and they can just oppose you because, you know, we believe in all human beings are created equal, and if you've got an IQ of 186, obviously you're not an American, and so forth and so on. But I wanted to share a little story with you, and it has to do with Coco Chanel, who was the creator of the Chanel line of perfumes and fashion, and she began her career as a milliner. She made hats for wealthy ladies. Each hat was a unique creation. They weren't stamped out in a factory. And Coco Chanel had a little tactic that she would use to keep the clients happy. She would do up the hat as well as she could, and then she would take a big, bright orange feather, and she would stick it right into the middle of the hat, and then she would show the hat to the client, and the client would say, it's beautiful, but, you know, I really don't like that orange feather. And Coco Chanel would say, fine, I understand, and she'd take the feather out. And the customer would go home happy with the hat and happy that she had some creative input on it. And, of course, Coco Chanel never intended for the hat to leave her shop with the feather in there. And I'm kind of wondering if Elliott Abrams is Donald Trump's version of Coco Chanel's feather, to get everybody all riled up, and then he's going to say, all right, yeah, we'll pull him back and let him go someplace else here. Because it does seem an odd pick, given Trump's rhetoric during the campaign. And I think there's a little game playing going on. I still think that Donald Trump is trying to convince the war hawks in the Senate that he's going to give them the wars they want as long as they will confirm his nominees for various cabinet positions, which so far they're pretty much doing. And, of course, once the confirmations are over, we're going to be looking very closely to see if Donald Trump has some kind of a change in policies and behavior. Because despite the tough rhetoric regarding Russia and China, Trump is still trying to maintain friendly relations with the leaders of these two countries. So there's a little bit of a double game going on, and we need to be cautious that we don't jump to conclusions as to what's going on in Donald Trump's mind, because certainly the corporate media is spinning everything that's coming out of the White House as to be an attack on Donald Trump. We know that a lot of the Obama holdovers in the White House are behind all of these leaks of supposed draft executive orders, which turn out to be fake. And I think Trump's and Priebus are going to have to do a real house cleaning and get some people in there who are going to be on board with the Trump administration, because Trump is dealing with a lot of inertia, bureaucratic inertia, even within the White House staff, and that has to stop. Now then, Donald Trump is signing new executive orders, and he just signed one that is absolutely got the liberals screaming and crying because they've been trying to portray him as racist. And remember, Donald Trump has been in the public eye for more than 30 years, and nobody ever called him misogynist or rapist or racist until he started running against Hillary Clinton. And if you remember the Bill Clinton campaigns, they believed in the politics of personal destruction. If you oppose us, we will destroy you. And I felt their wrath myself in Hollywood all those years ago. So Donald Trump has signed an executive order, and this executive order was crafted in part by students from Howard University, which is a historically black college. And this new executive order is going to ease the regulatory burden on historically black colleges and funnel more money to them through this executive order. And so he's got these black college graduates working on this. And so everybody's out there saying, well, he's still a racist, even though he's doing things for them. He'll always be. And just frothing at the mouth on this whole situation. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call from D in Michigan. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You are familiar with James Corbett?
Yes,
Corbett Report?
very much so.
Have you heard his last podcast, the swamp that Trump filled, where he goes through his whole cabinet and laying out the ties they have, like Goldman Sachs and, Jamie Dimon and Eric Prince and all these people that his picks are all tied to and how far back they go? And have you guys talked about that this weekend?
Well, I did see it referred to. I didn't watch the whole thing, and I think Corbett is hardly alone in being concerned that Trump hasn't so much drained the swamp as he's changed the alligators around. And there are a lot of people that Trump has brought into the administration that are questionable, and they do have conflicts of interest. But again, I think Donald Trump was trying to find the people best able to do the job, and is relying on the fact that being that he is the boss, they will do what he tells them to do, and if they don't, they will then be fired. And again, the parallel goes back to General Patton, following World War II and the surrender of Germany, and Patton was managing Germany, if you will, and he started appointing ex-Nazis to positions in the civil government, and he was roundly criticized for it. And he said, look, these are the people who know how to make the trains run on time, who know how to keep the electricity running, who know how to keep all of this stuff working. And if you can find me somebody who knows how to do the job who isn't a Nazi, I will put them in there. But until I find somebody who actually can do the job, I'm going to go with the people who know the job. And I think that's at least part of Trump's thinking. And, of course, he does owe some favors to some of his backers during the campaign. That's an inevitability.
Right. I had just one more question. I'm sure you heard Sessions got
Absolutely.
in AG.
Absolutely.
Do you have any worries about his stance on like backdoor encryption and war on drugs and increasing surveillance on us and everything like that? Do you can he go forward with that agenda, or does he need I don't know how to say like a majority? Like he has to get a majority from Congress to pass the bill, or you can't just say, all right, we're going to put backdoors in encryption.
Well, legally and officially, he cannot, and the FBI has already been chastised for planting malware on hundreds of computers of perfectly innocent people in their attempt to trap one server of child pornography. And it did go beyond. The main problem with this surveillance and backdoors is not the Department of Justice. It is the National Security Agency, which is clearly operating outside the law and the Bill of Rights. Now, obviously, we're hoping that there's going to be some pullback from mass surveillance of the American people for two reasons. One, it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And secondly, it is hugely expensive to be keeping an eye on literally billions of people around the world who aren't doing anything. And you could save a huge amount of money and probably be a lot more efficient just focusing on the people who are potential problems. And so from both a legal and a practical point of view, I'm hoping Trump is going to tamp down on some of this nonsense.
Gotcha. And I got one more question, and I'll let you go.
Okay.
As far as Trump putting in all these generals in positions that are typically held by civilians, why? I see that these military generals see everything through a military lens. I don't see why everybody's freaking out about that.
I don't either. We had a general as president back when I was born here. I think Trump may be relying on the fact that he can count on these military people to obey orders of the commander-in-chief a lot more reliably than these civilians, some of whom think they probably should have been president instead. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, D, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to grab a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I'm calling from Global Cooling, New Jersey. It's freezing over here and it snowed.
I just got an email from a family member in New Hampshire, and they said they're already under blizzard conditions.
Yeah, the sun's out now, but it got cold out, man. I'm staying in. Talking to Mike. Hey, Mike, the Trump buffoon is just a Brooklyn thing, New York thing. If you watch my hand on the left, you see my hand on the left, and my hand on the right comes and smacks you on the side of the head. That's what Trump's doing. It's a bait and switch. Because that's the only way he's going to get things done. But let the media and all these other people focus on this one particular side of the room, and then Trump's doing something on the other side of the room.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I'm saying we really have to be cautious because Trump is basically, again, to get an insight into how he thinks, you need to read his book, The Art of the Deal, because he is definitely a player, and I think he's using those tactics that served him well in business as president. And like I said, I'm waiting to see when the confirmations are all over and done with. If Trump starts making some significant policy changes, then we'll know that he's just been gaming the Senate and the war hawks to get him to go along with his nominees. I'm hopeful that's what we'll see. Because if Donald Trump does not significantly change the economic and military course of this country, he could wind up the very last president of the United States of America.
Exactly. Hey, Mike, what do you think of the idea of getting rid of everybody in the State Department because it's a useless bureaucracy anyway?
It's an interesting idea, especially when you realize that these very, very powerful organizations and bureaucracies are very, very often they're the mechanism by which certain people are protected. They're not about prosecuting the guilty. They're about protecting the guilty and making it look like it's somehow legal, as we saw with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, because that's just another group of left-behinds from Obama, because that's what they are, is left-behinds, to throw monkey wrenches. I said this before, throw monkey wrenches in front of Trump. So if you get rid of that bureaucracy, all you have to do is call up whoever you want to and make deals. You don't need to have a bureaucracy in the State Department. They do nothing. They're just there, pencil pushers. It's just there for government workers.
Well, there's a huge amount of waste and feather bedding in the government. Everybody knows that. We're hoping that that's something Donald Trump is going to be taking care of. But definitely Trump needs to realize that he has got to get rid of these holdovers from these past administrations who are still serving their former masters. Because they're out there to get him. He's got a big problem with the Obama holdovers in the White House leaking information to the media, which the media can then twist and misquote to try and harm Donald Trump.
But they're also in the Pentagon, Mike, because you got, remember the former Supreme Allied Commander of the Empire, Star Wars type of thing, General Strangelove, Breedlove.
That's a different mechanism. All the people in the Pentagon, they want more money, they want more weapons, they want wars because then they can feel important. Because if we're at peace and there are no wars, these top officers, they look like a marching band that's lost its instruments, with all the ribbons and the medals and the brass and everything. They're actually rather silly when they don't have large weapons behind them to point at you.
And Mike, Trump, we go back to Trump, he's acting like he's a buffoon. I don't think so, but the real buffoons is Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters, those people.
Oh, boy.
Mike, it's not even they're on drugs or they're senile or they're sociopath. That's basically a sociopathic behavior.
No, actually, I would go with the former. They're clearly suffering senile dementia. They're just out there, repeating stuff. Maxine was confused. Pelosi's confused. Maxine had another meltdown on the media, and they're just out there thrashing around, and it betrays the disintegration of the liberal core. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials. Thank you, Dustin. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take another phone call, and then we're going to do some news. Patrick in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, well, thanks, Mike, for taking the call. Yeah, I was just kind of curious. My initial question would have been about what's your feelings about Pete Thiel, because the reason why I have concerns, this guy's a 10-year veteran of what you call the private Davos group. He's one of the advisors for Trump. I don't trust the guy.
Well, again, everybody's trying to infiltrate and hijack the administration, and I'm not sure that Priebus is doing the best possible job at helping Trump be an independent president. But again, if the entire system is corrupted, it's hard to find somebody who isn't corrupt to bring on to do the job.
And then the other thing is, I would just say, what about the NGOs, all these foreign policy think tanks that sit inside D.C.? These people are on the boards of trustees of all these groups, foreigners, and they're paying operatives to go out in the field and mimic intelligence and diplomatic functions of our government with no oversight. It's like a violation of 12333 executive order.
Yeah, the NGOs are a big problem, especially the ones by George Soros. And that's why so many countries are starting to crack down on these things and say, unless you are actually serving some kind of a positive purpose, we have no obligation to allow you to operate inside our national borders. Russia has banned all of Soros' NGOs. Macedonia, Hungary, Serbia are cracking down on him. And somebody was actually asking me, with all that Soros has done, why isn't he being arrested and charged? Because he's clearly in violation of the USA Patriot Act. And the answer is very simple, that he's got enough money where he's bribed the right people to avoid being arrested, or he's got enough money where any charges that are brought against him in court can be delayed through appeals until after he's dead, because he's advanced in years. He's not going to be around much longer. And that may be the reason he's pushing so hard right now, is he wants his dream of the one world government before he passes on.
Yeah, well then, Alex, Jonathan, Gregory, and Andrea will be next, along with Paul. So we know who they are.
Okay.
They are.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to close the phone lines for a little bit because I got a bunch of news I got to catch up on here. And as I mentioned before, Donald Trump has now established that the source for the corporate media getting these supposed draft executive orders, which are not officially released White House documents, has been the Obama people, the holdovers. And I think Trump needs to start getting rid of them because he needs a clean house to work in and get things done without having to look over his shoulder at everybody working around him and trying to figure out how they plan to sabotage him today. Now, we still have these women's groups out there screaming about gender pay inequality, and in general, it's simply non-existent. But the next time they get on up there and start screaming about we need Hillary, she'll end gender pay discrimination, you need to remind them the Clinton Foundation was very guilty of a gender pay gap. In fact, it was an area of concern during Hillary's campaign. Because the gender pay gap at the Clinton Foundation was an average of $81,000. And that was a major, major problem. But you keep that in mind the next time the feministas start screaming about gender pay inequality. And there is one more issue to keep in mind. And that is that obviously the highest paychecks are for those who stay in their careers the longest. And you have to factor in the reality that many women will work in a career and then they'll leave to have a family. And so they're not as present there at the higher levels or the longer levels of time in a corporation to achieve that high pay. Now, some women can have it both. Ivanka is a good example. And we have a family member who had both a career and a family. And she was saying, you can have it all, just not at the same time. Now then, let's talk about the corporate media who are out there screaming and crying about what a terrible time they're having. The former anchor at CNN, Piers Morgan, told Tucker Carlson on Monday that the corporate media is absolutely determined to bring down Donald Trump. They're not even trying to hide the bias any longer. And Piers Morgan was saying, I think some of them absolutely are determined to take him down. They were in the tank for Hillary Clinton, their candidate, and we certainly saw that. Look at how the corporate media protected Hillary Clinton, supported Hillary Clinton, insisted the polls were all showing she was going to win a landslide. Melania Trump constantly being attacked. Oh, she used to model in the nude. Well, she was a high-fashion model, and let's be honest, she's hot. It's just everything was an attack on Melania, and everything about Hillary was, oh, she's wonderful. It's amazing here. Now then, people are starting to keep score about what's going on with the corporate media. And in Donald Trump's first 3 weeks, the corporate media has been caught with 76 examples of absolute fabricated fake news. At the same time, the corporate media is pointing at the independent media, like this website, and say, oh, they're all lies. They're full of fake news when they talk about Hillary's email server, and they're all part of Russian propaganda and so forth, which is a lot of nonsense here. One of the biggest lies, of course, and we've already commented about this today, the entire corporate media is calling Donald Trump's travel moratorium from 7 specific countries a Muslim ban. It is nothing of the sort. The word Muslim does not even appear in the executive order. And if you are coming from one of these 7 countries, it doesn't matter if you're a Muslim, or a Christian, or a Jew, or an atheist, or a Pastafarian, or a Scientologist, or Voodoo, or Zoroastrianism, you're still going to run into the same problem getting into the country. It is not selective on the base of religion, but that's the lie the corporate media is telling you. Now, on Inauguration Day, CNN tried to claim they tied Fox News in the ratings on Inauguration Day. That turned out to be a lie. Time magazine was lying when it claimed that the erroneous reports appearing in their magazine were all Donald Trump's fault. Let's see. Skip on down. I'm not going to give you the entire list, but we need to come on down. Associated Press tried to claim that Trump's vote fraud expert is registered to vote in 3 states. That was not true. They claimed that Dick Cheney blasted Trump over the refugee pause. That was a lie. And it just goes on and on and on and on. Let's see some others here. It's a long list. You got to read it for yourself here. Got to read it for yourself here. It's just, this is what corporate media does. It's what they've always done. Remember that quote from Thomas Jefferson that I gave you yesterday? The corporate media is all about controlling your opinions, your point of view, your consciousness. That's why they get those multi-million-dollar paychecks. Now, Sean Spicer is definitely earning his money as the White House spokesperson. And there was an interesting altercation with a reporter from NBC, Kristen Welker. And Spicer took her to task over NBC reporting that General Kelly was completely unaware of anything to do with the travel moratorium. And, of course, General Kelly had gone on out there and said, I was informed, this is what I was told, this is when I was told it. And Spicer said, NBC got it wrong. And amazingly enough, NBC came on out and said, no, we didn't get it wrong. We were accurately reporting the story in the New York Times, so it's an accurate story. And Spicer is saying, how can it be accurate if it's wrong? All you're doing by saying you're citing the New York Times is you're shifting the blame. And right now, the New York Times, they're batting zero. They're just out there saying anything they think is going to help bring down Donald Trump and open the door to a color revolution here. Now, over in France, Facebook, Google, and the French corporate media are linking up to block fake news ahead of the upcoming elections. Now, Marine Le Pen is leading in the polls, but the Eurocrats do not want her. They're getting very, very nervous that so many Eurosceptic candidates are winning these elections. And there may be a plan to somehow steal this election away from her, just as there was a plan to try and steal the election away from Donald Trump last year. And despite claims that the independent media had absolutely no effect on the public perception of the election at all, which they said a week ago, contradicting what they were saying a month ago, that we just wrecked it for Hillary and everybody, it was all our fault. But they may be getting ready to try and steal that election, and they're already working to say we're going to block anything that is not from the corporate media or the government. Now, the founder of Media Matters, which is funded by George Soros, Brock, is coming on out and basically saying Media Matters is conspiring with Facebook and Google to shut down all independent media. And apparently there was a briefing book entitled Media Matters, the Top Watchdog Against Fake News and Propaganda, Transforming the Media Landscape. And it was basically privately given to donors in January and not intended for general distribution, but the Free Beacon got hold of a copy of it. And in the very first sentence of this report, the onslaught of well-funded right-wing media brings with it significant challenges. Well, first of all, the left wing is self-destructing. And second of all, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm not well-funded at all. And I dare David Brock to show any kind of a canceled paycheck that I'm in somebody's pocket. And here's where it gets interesting. Story coming out, well, it's a YouTube video, you need to take a look at it. Somebody went on out and started looking at the actual traffic going to the websites of the New York Times, the Washington Compost, the Guardian, and so forth, and discovered half of their traffic is coming from a botnet in China. In other words, half their online readership is phony and fake. And it appears that these corporate media outlets are in such dire financial trouble. Remember, the New York Times has had to vacate 8 floors of their own building and put them out as rental space to stay in business. And they're inflating their online readership, which means they're cheating their advertisers. That's how crooked it's gotten. Now, poll was held very recently, and people were being asked, who do you trust more? Who do you think is telling you the truth more? The corporate media or Donald Trump? And to nobody's surprise, Donald Trump won that one. The American people see the president as far more truthful than the corporate media. So let's turn to the war zones, because there's a lot going on over there, a lot of saber rattling here. Apparently, ISIS tried to attack southeastern Aleppo and retake it. They were driven back by Syrian government forces. And apparently the pro-Turkish forces once again failed to enter Al-Bab. Now, this is a very, very troubling story, because, and this is coming out of worldisraelnews.com, an IDF spokesperson is claiming at least 4 missiles were fired in the direction of Israel's southernmost city, Eilat, from Egypt. Or as they put it, from the direction of the Egyptian border. 3 of the missiles were successfully intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, and the 4th landed, as usual, in an empty lot. It looks like Israel's going to invade Egypt again. And remember what I said, look for what should be there and isn't. And what is missing is a reason for Egypt to launch 4 missiles into Israel and then just sit there and wait for the counterattack. Because if Egypt were going to attack Israel, it would be full on. It wouldn't just be 4 rockets. This is classic Israeli false flag here. Why would they do that? Well, we're seeing that Benjamin Netanyahu is one of the most corrupt political leaders in history, and in spite of all of his wealth and power, he's in trouble politically. He's under several investigations, new investigations being opened all the time, and there's a motive for Netanyahu to get into a major war with Egypt in the hope that the Israeli people would say, oh, we're afraid of Egypt. Don't remove Netanyahu. He is our savior. He will protect us from the evil Egyptians. It is amazing. Often very ridiculous reasons leaders will start a war just as a distraction, just to, well, obviously to make money. Hang on to power. Now, Marco Rubio has introduced a bill in the Senate to attack the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which seeks to basically motivate Israel to respect the rights of the Palestinians, obviously with this retroactive legalization of the illegal settlements, which is, by the way, only valid in Israel's eyes. Under international law, these are still illegal settlements. And Marco Rubio's out there saying, oh, we've got to stop boycott, divestment, and sanctions. We've got to let Israel go on stealing Palestinian land. And I don't know about you, but I've had it up to here with American politicians constantly bowing to Israel, and it is a reminder that here in the United States of America, we are living under foreign puppet rule, just like the people of Iraq, just like the people of Libya, just like the people of Yemen, just like the people of Afghanistan. Those countries don't like it. We shouldn't like it either. We shouldn't accept it. I think that's one of the reasons why Israel was so eager for Hillary to win the election. Donald Trump might actually stand up and say, you know, I think it's time that we stop doing everything Israel wants. Now, activists for the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement are having a fight all across the United States to stop these laws criminalizing free speech, and that's exactly what this is. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here, and basically all of these efforts to shut down the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement are a violation of the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. Now, Israel's defenders are still playing that worn-out card. Oh, it's anti-Semitism, it's hatred of the Jews, it's this, blah, 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 blah. No, it isn't. Nobody's criticizing Israel's religion or ethnic makeup. We are criticizing the behavior of Israel's government. And the First Amendment recognizes our right to criticize government, any government. But Israel doesn't want there to be freedom of speech because no tyrant, no conqueror, no corrupter wants freedom of speech. And every member of the U.S. Congress who is pushing against BDS is showing they have no respect for our Bill of Rights. That they support this idea of tyranny and dictatorship and the silencing of dissent. Now, interestingly enough, everyone's always talking about Russian aggression, Russian aggression, Russian aggression. And as it turns out, it's NATO that's in a constant state of expansion. And they're trying to basically get on in to more and more countries where NATO is not actually welcome. It's NATO that's being aggressive and seizing more territories, seizing control of more territories, not Russia. How many more times do you have to be lied to before you're willing to stand up and say, we're being lied to, and I'm just not going to listen to you guys anymore? Now, over in Germany, there was an article pointing out that despite the saber-rattling coming from within the war hawks in the Congress, that Trump himself is still maintaining a cordial relation with Putin. And they're talking about how this interview Sunday on Fox News, where they were out there trying to say, Putin's a killer, Putin's a killer, Putin's a killer. And Donald Trump came on back and said, there's a lot of killers. You think our country is so innocent, and of course that triggered a huge, how dare you say the United States does these kinds of things? And we all know the United States does do these kind of things. We posted a list at WhatReallyHappened.com. Not just for the United States, but for Great Britain. Empires commit horrible atrocities. And Trump is absolutely right. The American corporate media has basically started throwing stones in a glass house. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. Getting on back to the news. There's an interesting take coming out of Russia today regarding all this haranguing about Russian aggression, Russian aggression, Russian aggression, and all the posturing of NATO and the weapons and the cranking up the new Cold War. And basically, the take is what we ought to consider is that all of this Russia-bashing fear-mongering is yet another attempt to try and keep the European Union glued together. As bad as the EU is, as bad as the Euro is, as abusive and tyrannical as Brussels is, if you leave us, Russia will just pick you off. And it's certainly an idea that is deserving of consideration, because back during the first Cold War, that's all we ever heard. If you disobey the government, if you refuse to do what we do, the commies are going to come and get you. Now, Oliver Stone has called on Donald Trump to declassify all documents on the origins of the Ukraine crisis, pointing out that because of corporate media propaganda, most Americans don't really understand exactly what happened. They're still hearing nothing but Russia stole Crimea, Russia stole Crimea, Russia stole Crimea. That's the justification to build up hostility toward Russia. And, of course, that is not what happened. Following the U.S.-backed coup d'etat in Kiev that drove the legitimately elected President Yanukovych from power and replaced him with the puppet Poroshenko, the people of Crimea decided they wanted to secede from Ukraine, which is their right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And as a member of the United Nations, the United States is required to abide by that, and obviously they didn't. So the people of Crimea had the referendum to secede. It had better than 90% in favor. Then they had a second referendum, also 90%, requesting permission to merge with the Russian republics. Putin said yes. That's how it all came about. Now, the way the United States and the corporate media gets from that reality to saying Russia stole Crimea is through a bizarre piece of twisted logic saying we don't recognize Crimea's referendum. We don't recognize the right of the Crimean people to make these decisions about their own future. Therefore, by default, Russia has stolen Crimea. And as I mentioned yesterday, this is like a guest at a wedding deciding the bride did not have a right to marry this particular individual. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's exactly the way the logic works. And you can understand how silly it is regarding the wedding, and it is equally silly regarding this attempt to demonize Russia because the people of Crimea did not want to be ruled by a U.S. puppet ruler. Now, a leader of the Ukrainian Radical Party is got his knickers in a twist because his visa to go to the United States has just been revoked. And he's out there saying that unless the United States fulfills its obligations to Ukraine under the Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine will have to restore nuclear weapons to protect itself. So now there's the threat. If you don't do what we tell you to do, we're going to get nuclear weapons. It really is getting silly out there. Now, Huffington Post, which I still look at despite the obvious liberal bias in there, has an interesting article that Donald Trump has effectively broken the ice with Chinese President Xi Jinping in a letter that says, I'm looking forward to working with you to develop relations and resolve our conflicts without, difficulty and conflict. Looks very, very positive. And that Chinese official was very correct yesterday to say everybody who's screaming about the South China Sea needs to reread the history of World War II, because at the end of World War II, two of the treaties, the Cairo Proclamation and the Potsdam Declaration, both said Japan returns to China all territories seized by Japan. Those islands in the South China Sea, and there's a reason it's called the South China Sea, belonged to China before World War II. Japan invaded and occupied them. At the end of World War II, all the nations signed on to these treaties saying, yes, these islands go back to China. But again, these little hunks of rock are not the true agenda for trying to ramp up a war with China. The real agenda is that yuan, which is a serious, serious threat to the U.S. paper dollar and its hegemonic domination of the global economy. So is the ruble. That's really what's driving it. That's the reason our government is getting ready to send your children out to be killed and crippled in wars against Russia and China is an argument over whose brand of ink and paper gets used for global trade and banking for the next 100 years. That's it. That's it. So if you're a parent and you've got a child who's approaching military age, plunk that child down in front of you, and then hold up a Federal Reserve note. And then just ask yourself, is life and limb of my child worth this piece of paper with ink on it? And I think probably the vast majority of parents are going to say, heck no. Am I going to sacrifice life and limb of my child to make already insanely wealthy bankers even richer than they already are? That's a no. Because that's what these wars are really all about. Now, Russia is now talking with Iran about a possible return to Iran's Hamadan air base. And this was a base that Russia has used intermittently before. And now Russia and Iran are negotiating Russia's permanent use of this base, which I think is sending a message to the United States war hawks to be very, very cautious about trying to go into Iran. Just because Iran refuses to have a private central bank, and Iran refuses to sell their oil only for the dollar, and because Israel wants Iran smashed up. All right, we're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're going to take a phone call. Steve in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hey there, Michael. I was watching RT News yesterday, and it mentioned that Netanyahu has ramped up his effort in building in the West Bank. And I can only think the reason he's doing that right now is because Donald Trump is so busy right now, first of all, doing executive orders from Barack Obama, but he's also got these George Soros protesters making all kinds of trouble throughout the country. And so I think Netanyahu is kind of taking advantage of that whole situation, ramping it up real fast. Oh, yeah. I mean, Israel always does that. If there's something newsworthy going on in some other part of the world, Israel will use that opportunity to carry out more of their aggressions and slow-motion genocide against the Palestinians. But I think the impending charges for corruption are part of Netanyahu's motive, where he's trying to get Israel into a situation of conflict with Palestine and even possibly Egypt on the idea that the Israeli people will demand the corruption charges be dropped because only Benjamin Netanyahu can save us from the evil Palestinians and the evil Egyptians. Well, I agree with that assessment, very much so. Hey, one last thing here. My wife came home yesterday from work and told me she heard on the news that the East Bay, and actually the South Bay, over by San Francisco, the South Bay had a PSA on the radio saying that they expect to do another water rationing situation this spring and summer. And as we're looking outside and we're seeing all this flooding, the Russian River is going to flood again today. It's already passed 32 feet, and 32 is the beginning of the flood stage. They expect it to hit 35 by tomorrow afternoon. So, you know your little saying, look for what should be there and isn't, when you're trying to decipher the truth from a fallacy. I think you got to print that up on a T-shirt with the logo from your show. That is such a great line to use. I share that with people all the time, and who are so gullible to buy anything they're told. Say to look for what should be there and isn't. That's a great line. You got to have that on a shirt.
Okay, we'll put it on a shirt, and it'll be out there. Now, in the case of California and the water, there are two things you need to look at. One is that the state government is not just looking at water for the residents of the state. They're also looking at water allocation for agricultural purposes. Obviously, California is a major agricultural center, industrial use, and so forth. Here in Hawaii, when we first moved here, all we heard was constant, water shortage, put restrictors in the faucets and so forth. And what it turned out was the state of Hawaii was simply reserving the majority of the available water to our local agriculture, especially the pineapple plantations. They use a huge amount of water. Well, over the last several years, a lot of these agricultural plantations have shut down, and they've been bulldozed, and condos are going up there, most of which are still sitting empty. And all of a sudden, the water problem went away. And it's kind of hard to live with the realization that your need for water is considered a lower priority than that of a fruit. But that is the way that happens. The other factor, though, is you've got two of California's major freshwater aquifers are now contaminated with fracking fluid, and they're not really usable. They were talking about trying to use that water for irrigation for agriculture, but as it turns out, once the fracking fluid gets on the produce, there's no way to get it on off, so they had to cancel that. Another important thing, we're going to be talking about it a little bit later in the show, the Oroville Dam has suffered a collapse of portions of its spillway. And the water that is rushing on down there, which forms part of the water supply for that part of California, is now scouring out all kinds of dirt and other contaminants from the ground underneath the spillway, which is contaminating Lake Oroville itself, or the lower part, the below the dam part. And everyone's doing the usual platitudes. It's not a problem. We'll get it fixed eventually. But meanwhile, that's a source of water that is no longer safe to use. And they're out there saying, not to worry about the dam. But how many times have we been told it's not going to be a problem, and then all of a sudden we got a major, major problem on our hands?
Let me give you one real quick scenario that happened here last year. We were on this water restriction last year, and you could water only on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, one part of town. The other part had the town, had the other days. But at that same time, we were doing the water restriction. You can only water, 15 minutes, on those opposite days. The city-town council had voted in and allowed the purchase of a huge property here outside where I live of 89 acres to an Indian group to build a 200,000-case winery and another subdivision to kind of augment that. At the same time, they're telling you water shortage, restrict your water use. They allowed a 200,000-case winery to be built. Now, I have friends in the wine business. They use an awful lot of water in their wineries.
Yes,
either
they do.
Cleaning or for irrigation.
Those grapes take an awful lot of water. And the other problem that California is facing is that Nestle is still sucking fresh water out of one of the untainted aquifers for mere pennies. I don't even know if they've renewed their permit. There was a big stink that their permit had expired a few years ago. And they'll bottle it and they'll sell it back to the people of California for $1 or $2 a bottle. And it's just an absolute scam. And it's part of this mindset that human beings do not have a right to any of the things required to live. They should all be commoditized to make some corporation rich. And they've already done that to food. They're doing it to water. Somewhere down the road, they're going to can up the air and sell it to you. They're already doing that in heavily polluted places in Asia, where you can go into a little booth and plunk your money into a slot, and you will be allowed to stand there for 5 minutes breathing filtered fresh air.
Hey, thank you, Michael. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, Donald Trump, as part of his desire to build a more efficient military, is responding to all the saber-rattling by Iran and North Korea. I mean, remember, both North Korea and Iran are saying we are building defensive systems because all we hear from the United States is invade, 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 invade. So it makes perfect sense. They're going to be building defensive systems. But Donald Trump wants to boost anti-missile research. And if this sounds suspiciously like Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, it is. Being able to intercept ballistic missiles coming on in. Now, there are some problems with that. First of all, for all the money that was borrowed and spent on Reagan's Star Wars program, they didn't really come up with anything that worked very well. And if you think about the problem, it is extraordinarily difficult. It's hitting one bullet with another bullet. The shape of a MIRV is naturally radar stealthy. It's hard to get a return off of it. If you're tracking by infrared, the infrared sensors tend to go for what's called the centroid of the heat bloom, which is usually actually behind where the warhead itself is. Now, further complicating it is the latest generation of Russian and Chinese MIRVs are now maneuverable. They are not coming into their target on a predictable ballistic path. They're flipping back and forth, corkscrewing, dipsy-doodle, bouncing all over the place on their way to their target, which means you can't predict where they're going to be, you know, in time to get an interceptor in position. So what they're talking about now is zero time of flight weaponry, meaning lasers or some kind of charged particle beam. Now, laser cannons are a military reality, but only over short distances because of a problem called thermal blooming, which means when you're firing a high-energy laser through the atmosphere, part of the laser's energy is absorbed by the air, water molecules, dust, dirt, the occasional bird, and converted to heat. And that heat will roil the air, and that will cause the laser beam to start diverging, making it very hard to deliver an adequate amount of energy to the intended target. Now, some people are talking about the possibility of some kind of charged particle system, but charged particles work very well in a vacuum, not so well in the air, which is a natural insulator, and you always have to deal with the fact that Earth's magnetic field is going to be pulling a charged particle beam in one direction or the other. Now, if Earth's magnetic field were perfectly uniform, you could compensate for that. But Earth's magnetic field is not uniform. There are areas where there are magnetic deflections, basically over areas with high iron ore. And so it's very, very difficult, and I suspect that we're going to see a lot of money poured into this and not get anything really usable out of it. I'm almost reminded of the movie War Games, where at the very end, the computer finally realizes the only winning move is not to play. Of course, for the 2017 remake, they're changing it to, well, let's give it a shot anyway here. All right, we're going to grab a quick phone call from Bill in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing fine. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you a question about your show yesterday. You were talking about some great concerns about Iran and the government of Iran pulling away from the U.S. dollar, which is, you know, like you were saying, all wars are bankers' wars.
Yes.
I had a question for you. The bill that JFK had, 11110, which would eliminate the Federal Reserve and bring us to our own currency, which would pretty disrupt the private central bank. Is there any way by law that Trump could possibly resurrect that bill how would that affect the situation with Iran?
Okay, well, the two are two somewhat different things here. I'm going to have to put you on hold because we got to take a break for commercials. Don't hang up, and when you come on back, I will answer your question. So we'll be back after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Bill in Pennsylvania, and I want to clarify a little bit of history here. John F. Kennedy's Executive Order 11110 did not attempt to shut down the Federal Reserve. What Kennedy did was authorize, with his authority as president, the issuance of a new U.S. legal tender currency called the United States Note. And it was backed by the silver, still held by the U.S. Treasury at that time. And he put about $4.5 billion into circulation, which back in the 1960s, that was a lot of money. And there was all of this currency for the country to be using that was not accruing interest to the private central bank. And it was a significant threat to the profits of the private central bank, the Federal Reserve. It was certainly a threat to their monopolistic control over the public currency. And following Kennedy's assassination, the United States notes were pulled from circulation and destroyed, except for examples held by collectors, and everybody was forced to go back to using Federal Reserve notes borrowed at interest from the privately owned Federal Reserve. And on the Warren Commission sat John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank. And I don't care how good a banker he is, he was not qualified to be investigating the murder of a president, so we may presume that he was there to make sure the link between the Kennedy assassination and the Federal Reserve remained hidden. Now, Donald Trump, if he's willing to risk his life, could repeat that. The president has the authority to have the Treasury issue a public currency that is operating interest-free. But again, he's risking his life by doing that. Now, as far as...
Well, don't you think... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, with regard to Iran, any country has the right to use whatever currency they want, both internally and for trade with other countries. But the United States, ever since Nixon ended gold convertibility for the Federal Reserve notes, has been coercing other countries to only use the U.S. dollar to trade their natural resources and do banking. And through this device, they make a huge amount of money in interest off of all this money that's loaned out to the rest of the world to buy and sell oil or various other natural resources. But more and more countries are moving away from that. The dollar is already in decline as the global trade and banking currency. And none of these last forever. I mean, Roosevelt's deal to Winston Churchill to bring the United States into World War II was for the British pound to surrender its role as the global currency. And what really makes it kind of ironic about all of this, at the end of World War II, when most accounts were still being settled with bars of bullion or boxes of paper banknotes, it made sense to have a global currency everybody knew could be trusted. But in this day and age of instantaneous global financial transactions, there is no need for a single global currency anymore. It's an obsolete idea, but it's being propped up because right now, without that, the U.S. economy is going to crash.
Yeah, I really think that Bill 11110 really was JFK's way of trying to release us from the financial slavery of the Rothschilds' private Federal Reserve.
No question.
And, and I really, in my heart of hearts, believe that that's what we need today to bring us finally to release the chains off of us, financial slavery, which I've heard you mention so many times, and I've learned a lot from listening to you also. But if he doesn't do that, the other idea that you had about eliminating the debt from the interest slavery, which I really think is, just from listening to you also, the other countries are just tired of it. So they're like, we're not doing this anymore. So if he's not going to do the 11110 thing and really get us away from it, is there any way, don't you think, that he could possibly do what Putin did and just police it at least to the point to where we don't have a financial collapse?
That's another possible option here. We're going to have to let you go and take a break for commercials, and I'll have a few more comments for you after we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And finishing up on my conversation with our previous caller, Congress has the authority to revoke the charter of the Federal Reserve at any time. Now, the Federal Reserve was originally chartered for a limited period of time, 100 years, and then in the 1930s, Congress voted to make it open-ended. The problem is, as history has shown, any nation that tries to free itself from the slavery of the private central banks is immediately attacked by all the other nations that are still enslaved to the private central banks. And that is a problem. That was a big reason for World War II. Germany kicked out the private central bank from the Treaty of Versailles. And they started issuing a value-based currency that turned Germany's economy around. They called it the German miracle. And that was a threat to the private central bankers because all over the world people were saying, let's do what Germany's doing. It's obviously working for the people and the nation. So this upstart who thought a government should create its own money, they have to be dealt with decisively. Now, I want to make a distinction here. Private central banking is a scam. It is a device to enslave the human race to the private central bankers. It's made the owners of the private central banks, primarily the Rothschilds, so rich, nobody dares mention how rich they really are. Now, this is distinct from the normal depositor bank, where you put your money in a savings account, the bank loans it out, because that is a valuable tool to organize a community's excess cash for business development and expansion. So when I'm talking about the private central banks, I'm talking only about the private central banks and not the regular traditional depositor banking institution, which is a very, very useful thing for a community to have. And there we are. Unfortunately, I think what's going to have to happen, and maybe about to happen, is we're going to have to see this globalized, interlinked network of private central banks all come crashing down at the same time. And that's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the human race to stand up and say, no more of this. We refuse to be slaves to private central bankers any longer. They're essentially legalized counterfeiting operations. They create the amount out of thin air, and they loan it out into circulation at interest. It's that old 11th marble. Okay, we are seeing on the news a headline that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will rule on Donald Trump's travel moratorium today, they say. But then they've been saying that ever since arguments were heard, waiting on the appeals court. The fact that the appeals court has taken this long is signaling to me they're trying to find some way around Title VIII. Or they may be waiting to announce tonight so that we can have a weekend full of riots by the illegal immigrants and the refugees. And what a wonderful public relations nightmare that will be. Goldman Sachs is issuing a warning on the oil markets and signaling it may be indicating that we're heading into yet another recession, or let's be a little bit more accurate, a continuation of the decline in the nation's economy going back to 2008. But apparently Goldman Sachs has decided instead of trusting the official data, they're going to adjust the data with their own models and make everything look much more manageable and keep their investors happy here. Now, one of the issues that's coming on out, and this is from oilprice.com, is a concern that OPEC did have a plan to reduce output to try and increase demand and drive prices back up. But some of the OPEC nations, such as Libya and Nigeria, were given exemptions. They're allowed to pump and sell as much oil as they want because of the ongoing conflicts in those regions. And these nations may basically have undermined the plan to artificially increase demand. Now then, story out of Investment Watch blog, Recession 2017. Things are happening that usually never happen unless a new recession is beginning. And apparently, according to Gallup, U.S. economic confidence has soared to the highest level ever recorded, but the key economic indicators are absolutely flashing red that a new recession is in fact beginning. And it's going to be a bad one. One of the things that may be driving that is the combined student and auto loans have hit $2.5 trillion with a T dollars. And there is a big default problem with the student loans and a growing default problem with the auto loans because a couple of years ago they started playing with auto loans the way they played with mortgages back in 2008. The subprime, giving auto loans to people whose credit history wasn't good, whose employment history wasn't solid, and then bundling up the auto loans and selling them as investment vehicles. They're making the same mistake all over again. And why do they not learn from their mistakes? Because every time they make a mistake, the poor people are forced to pay for it. So Wall Street will put together one of these scams. They'll make a bunch of money, then the whole thing will implode, and the losses are transferred on to the American people, and that is economic fascism at work. Now, Hawaii's Representative Tulsi Gabbard, and I'm still trying to get her on the show here, is trying to bring back Glass-Steagall. We've been hearing all about Donald Trump's rescinding Frank Dodd, or Dodd-Frank rather, and how difficult and complex it's going to be. And yes, I agree with the idea of reduced regulation, if for no other reason than to reduce the confusion, to reduce the number of loopholes that can be exploited, and just have a very clear, simple set of rules everybody is supposed to play by. But he didn't go far enough, because he didn't go back to rescinding the bill that ended Glass-Steagall to allow Citigroup to continue in business. And it has to come on back, or we're going to see the same excesses that led to 2008 happen all over again. Now, General Motors is slashing thousands of jobs, and because of this, they have made $9.4 billion with a B dollars in global profits. Now, if they're letting their workers go, I'm wondering just who they expect to be buying their cars. Do you know why Henry Ford was such a great businessman? Now, if you went to school, you were probably taught Henry Ford invented the automobile. No, he didn't. The Germans did. The first self-powered automobile was invented in Germany. What Henry Ford invented was the assembly line. And Henry Ford had a dictum which is unfortunately long lost in the American business psyche. And that was the best way to become prosperous was to make the community prosper around you. And Henry Ford made a point of paying his workers very well because it made them better workers, and it allowed them to buy the cars they were building. And seeing workers driving around in these cars just absolutely convinced everybody this was a car ordinary working people could afford. Cars were no longer items of luxury reserved to the millionaires. We can have a car. These workers are driving these cars all over the place, and that was what made Ford so amazingly successful. And it was a brilliant, brilliant idea. The best way to become prosperous is to make your community around you prosper. That's what Ford did, and it worked. Today, our entire corporate psyche is caught up in money junkie addiction. I want all the money for me. We're going to let the workers go. We're going to replace them with robots. Gee, nobody's coming into our stores to buy our products anymore. I'm about to go out of business. What happened here? Now, Whole Foods is announcing store closings. And they're talking about increased competition, which is true, and slowing sales growth. part of the problem is that Whole Foods feels they can charge premium prices for their GMO, chemical-free food, and when the economy was functioning, people who were health aware and health conscious were willing to pay that extra money to get the safe and healthy and natural organic food to eat. But as the economy tightened and food budgets tightened, people had to stop going to Whole Foods and just go back to their regular supermarket and say, I'm just going to have to take a risk that what I'm eating isn't going to, cause strange things to grow out of my head. And so the business model that worked before isn't working now. Now, Twitter shares have cratered. They missed their revenue projections by a huge margin. And a big part of it, of course, is that with Twitter now jumping on to this idea of censoring people and controlling what they say and filtering for the liberal snowflakes, people aren't using Twitter anymore. They're going to the new startup companies that are promising a censorship-free social media platform. And these new platforms, Gab, Diaspora, Scene Life, VK, are starting to capture more and more of the market share. They got a long way to go to be rivals to Twitter and Facebook, but they are gaining. Now, moving on here. Apparently, Jason Chaffetz, just a few days ago, was having another congressional hearing, and apparently was rather shocked to discover that the United States Post Office is effectively bankrupt. So, I think we can see an increase in stamp prices in the very, very near future. Of course, part of the problem is that most communication is now moved over to the Internet. Email, including advertising, which the junk mail was a big part of the post office revenue stream. To put those little cards in your mailbox saying, come on down and, 2-for-1 deal at the local car wash or whatever. And we might see the United States Post Office basically focus more on parcel delivery, in which case they're going to be competing with UPS, FedEx, and these other various companies. And sorry about that. That was something I was not expecting. Gold prices are continuing to surge. For the 5th consecutive day, gold prices have traded to higher pricing. And gold has now added over $100 per ounce since trading to a low of $11.25 per ounce in December of last year. And the last time gold prices were this high was on November 11th, just following the post-election sell-off. Now, we may see the money junkies try and rig the gold prices back down again with more of these already way over-leveraged paper contracts. Because if gold, or for that matter silver, palladium, any investment metal were to suddenly take off, you're going to see a lot of people start to close those negative interest savings accounts, start pulling out of what is already turning out to be a highly volatile stock market that is losing its Trump momentum, and getting into metals as a form of wealth preservation. And that's one of the reasons why, as they talk more and more about a cashless society, they're also talking about a metals ban. Because it isn't just cash they want to take away from you, it's any means of holding value outside the control of the banks. We're already way past the abuses of King George III and his Currency Act. Apparently, Deutsche Bank is being hit with even more fines over these questionable Russian trades, which appear to have been efforts at money laundering. And we look at the history of Deutsche Bank and wonder, how is it they're still in business? They were caught helping to rig the LIBOR rates. There's been a lot of questionable stuff out of Deutsche Bank. And it almost seems like the financial centers have reached a point where the only thing keeping them from collapse is fraud. Apparently, the New York Stock Exchange is now facing a lawsuit over the 2015 blackout. 4 hours long, was the worst in the exchange's history, and they're being sued by all those people who believe that during those 4 hours they would have made their fortune. Now, Big Dairy, as a whole, is going to pay a $52 million settlement for trying to artificially inflate milk prices. And this goes back to 2011, where the industry, where all the dairy companies said, we're going to start killing off some of our milk cows to create an artificial shortage, which will drive prices and profitability up. And as a result, now they've been sued. They lost the lawsuit. They're going to have to pay damages. The part that really bothers me is how our culture, including our political culture and our corporate culture, really has lost their moral compass. The attitude seems to be to get away with whatever you can get away with, and if you get caught, well, it's just the cost of doing business. And that's not healthy for the long term. It's not healthy for the nation. It's not healthy for our economy. And more around the world, people are starting to get very, very nervous about dealing with these large financial institutions or even American corporations in general. And I imagine it's very, very frustrating. Now, there's a big question about Donald Trump. Is he going to change his mind regarding the issue of entitlements? And according to Representative Mark Meadows, who's chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, he's basically saying Trump is prepared to start looking at reform of various entitlement programs, as long as the current beneficiaries do not see any benefits cut. And I think that's probably a fair way to handle it, not harm the people who've already paid into the system and are expecting a certain return, but to start and look at ways of making it more efficient. I think one of the first things Trump has to do is end this practice of allowing the government to borrow from the Social Security Trust Fund and just spend the money as general revenues and then not pay it back, which is what happened back during the Bill Clinton administration and is the reason Social Security is in such serious trouble right now. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're hearing that Italy's banking crisis may be far worse than we thought, which shouldn't come as a surprise because once you get past the legally mandated reporting requirements, obviously the executives at these corporations do not want the public, and certainly not the stockholders, to know how bad things really are. It's always going to be, yeah, we're fine. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. But we've been talking about Italy for a very, very long time, and they're in serious trouble. And because of economic globalism that is tying, first of all, the entire EU together through the ECB, and on a higher level, the entire Western banking system, we're out of that safe time in history where the private central bank of a country could collapse and the other countries were still in a condition to go back on in and refinance and restart it up. It's going to be very, very different. We could see all the private central banks come crashing down at the same time, and I think that's a good thing because it would encourage nations to go back to government-issued currencies and stop looting their people to make already wealthy bankers wealthier still. Private central banking is a scam. It's a fraud. It is a hoax. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I know you was talking about Whole Foods and all. You know, I'm a guy who tries to eat as much organic as possible and, you know, healthy stuff as possible, as little as GMO as possible and all. And what I notice, at least around here, is you're getting more and more competition with Whole Foods. And that's bringing the prices down. That's a good thing, like Trader Joe's. That's they've got good wholesome food there, and
yeah, we go to down to earth. We go to down to earth out here.
Yeah, we got an Earth Fair up there, and there's also a wholesale place called Hopies, which is they get stuff that like kombucha tea. Sometimes they'll have 5 for $5.
Yeah,
Or,
but there's one thing there's one thing
apple
you need to be
cider
careful of. There's one. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're almost at station identification. When you go into a store that is selling organic, natural foods, you need to read the labels because the demand for organic, GMO-free, chemical-free food is exceeding the supply, and a lot of foreign suppliers of supposedly organic, natural food are sort of cheating. And so, best way to eat organic is to go to your local farmer's market where they're growing the stuff right there and then. And if you're going to a Whole Foods or a Down to Earth, read the labels and make sure that whatever you're holding didn't get imported from some country where they're allowed to say it's natural and organic even when it isn't.
Oh yeah, I do read the labels. I don't trust these people at all. And but like a lot of the stuff really is just they're just able to sell at a lot cheaper prices.
Okay, well, Mark, I'm sorry to cut you off. We're going to have to let you go. Station identification. Back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. And turning to the immigration refugee crisis all over the world, and they're now saying that the Ninth Circuit Court will release their ruling on Trump's travel moratorium by 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. Trying to build the suspense, I guess. I don't know. Over in Germany, Angela Merkel is planning on spending billions of the German taxpayers' marks, or euros actually, on foreign aid, even though she's having to deal with a 70 billion pound migrant bill. These refugees and migrants are costing these countries a huge amount of money. Now, I saw a piece of propaganda coming on out about how the refugees and migrants are actually contributing to the economy because they're spending X number of dollars. Well, where are they getting those dollars? If they're getting them through food stamps and welfare, then it's a zero-sum game. Now, the ex-European Parliament President, Martin Schulz, is worried that if Brexit is allowed to proceed, and there is no legal ground to block it at this point, that the EU could fall apart because they're already hearing from so many of these other countries, we want out. We want out. And he's chastising all these countries who are pointing the finger of blame at Brussels and saying, no, Brussels is fine, the euro is fine. You just failed your duty to the European Union. So the blame shift regatta is well and truly underway. Another story on the same topic from Sputnik News. Eurosceptics winning elections to have devastating impact on EU institutions. And they're looking specifically at the upcoming elections in France and the Netherlands and saying that if the Eurosceptics win those two elections, that could probably be it. It's only going to be a matter of time before the EU falls apart. Now, over in France, they 5 months ago, they built a center for de-radicalization. Because all these people are becoming radicalized. They're converting to Islam. They're becoming radical. So we need a center to de-radicalize them. It's been sitting there 5 months, absolutely empty, and the French government is refusing to close it. And I read that story, and it reminded me of something that was happening back in the 1990s when the feministas were out there with this all men are rapists and so forth. And they got various colleges and universities to set up rape crisis centers, which allowed the people screaming about the rape crisis to have a paycheck without doing a whole heck of a lot for it other than sitting in the rape crisis center. And as it turned out, the vast majority of them were never used because there really wasn't a rape crisis going on. And again, there's a wonderful book called Who Stole Feminism by Christine Hobbs Summers. And she is a feminist herself. She's an equity feminist, as we all started out. And she basically documents on how the feminist movement was hijacked by politicians and opportunists and turned into gender feminism. The future is women. where the future is female, according to Hillary Clinton. And, you know, the men are rapists and all the rest of that other nonsense. And it made these opportunists incredibly rich. And they actually harmed the original intentions of feminism, equality, and instead of making women more self-assured and able to defend themselves and get along in society, it turned them into a new victim class. There were so many police departments that were sued for false arrest. When they were arresting men for rape who had not actually done it, the end result was police departments were even less willing to believe women who'd really been raped out of fear that there would be a lawsuit down the road. Story coming out of Breitbart. Almost half of criminal suspects in Munich are non-Germans. Remember what I said about migration is a filtering mechanism. You're not getting the best of those source countries. You're getting the people who couldn't make it there. You're getting the people who are fleeing prosecution. Now, here's where it gets interesting. German Minister Wolfgang Schäuble has told Greece the only way their debts can be written off is if Greece leaves the Eurozone. So they're already out there saying, well, maybe we need to get rid of some of the member states of the Eurozone, the ones that are most seriously in debt, forgetting that much of Greece's debt was the result of this underhanded deal between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs to hide the scale of Greece's debt from the EU, and in the process wound up doubling it. And of course, Goldman Sachs made a small fortune off of this. We're going to do a quick shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, the city of Dayton, Ohio has officially reversed their sanctuary city policy. They have been a sanctuary city, and basically they've just rescinded it and saying that, yes, local police will cooperate fully with federal immigration authorities. Pushback has begun. According to a Harvard economist, 42% of immigrant households are now on public assistance. Those are actually very mild numbers compared to some that we had in a report last week. This idea that somehow open borders is going to help our economy is nonsense. We don't even have enough jobs for the legal American citizens. We have over 90 million American citizens willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months or years. And we should not be allowing anybody in to compete for the available jobs until we have full employment of the American people. That everybody who wants a job has a job available, a good paying job, so they can start generating new wealth and pouring it back into the system. Now, here's a bizarre story about just how wacko political correctness has become. This is a story that is coming out of the CBS affiliate in Los Angeles, and they're talking about this woman in Orange County, Mary Campos, and she's like a 1,000,000-mile flyer on United Airlines. She does a lot of travel on business. She gets all the perks and the cards. And apparently, she had pre-booked a nice seat for an upcoming flight. And as she got to the gate attendant took her boarding pass and gave her another one for a different seat, saying that her pre-booked seat was right next to what are described as two Pakistani monks who didn't want to sit next to a female. And so this woman is screaming she was being discriminated against on the basis of her gender, and she was. Because however they do things in Pakistan, these two Pakistanis are not in Pakistan, and we do not want to turn the United States of America into Pakistan. And it is very arrogant and rude for anybody to come into the United States of America and demand we change to their system of politics, society, religion. That's impolite. When I have gone to other countries to work during my film career, I made a point of learning as much of the language as I could and basically just respecting how things were done there. And not run around saying, well, in the United States, we would do this, and we would do this, and why aren't you doing that? Because that was the image of the ugly American. And I'm wagging my finger rather firmly at United Airlines for pandering to this. And just, if they were going to do something, if these two Pakistani monks, and I never even heard of a Pakistani monk before, if they really didn't want to sit next to a female, they could wait for another airplane. They're the ones who should have changed their seats if they really felt they couldn't sit next to a woman. Not penalize the woman for their beliefs. That would have been the correct thing to do, is give these two monks the option of changing flights or changing seats. I hope she sues United, and I hope she wins. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Scott in Norfolk, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I just wanted to talk about 2 points, immigration and asset forfeiture. On the immigration side, there's a viral video going around that's excellent in describing how immigration can alleviate world poverty. If your listeners want to pull up on YouTube, immigration and gumballs.
Oh, I've seen that. That's a wonderful one. I have to post that.
Isn't it great?
Yes.
It explains it perfectly. And the asset forfeiture, I just got done watching a video of our president meeting with the sheriffs from around the country. And it was an excellent meeting, and people want to pull that up, too. It was fantastic. These sheriffs tell the president, says, listen, we've been here many times, but normally we're sat down and we're talked to. No one asked us any questions. We're talked to about gun control and other things. And Trump finds out that none of them has ever been invited into the Oval Office, which is 10 feet away from where they're holding their meeting. And he tells the press, he says, I've talked to heads of auto companies. They come in here in their meeting room, and I asked if they've ever been in the Oval Office, and they've never been invited in. But the reason I bring that up is there was one spot that I disagreed with. When one of the sheriffs talked about asset forfeiture, they did not give Trump correct problem with that. He didn't tell him that the police are using asset forfeiture, taking money away from innocent people. Yeah,
that was, I had a tremendous concern about that, where Trump should have done a little more due diligence on the issue, because obviously from the police departments that are profiting from all this civil forfeiture, they're going to say, oh, well, we're only targeting known criminals, we're taking away their money, so we're taking away the proceeds of crime. And obviously it's not in these police officers' interests to admit that vast sums of money are being confiscated from law-abiding Americans who have not been charged with a crime, let alone convicted. And that does need to be put back in there. Now, the original intent of the civil forfeiture laws was to take the wealth away from drug dealers and money launderers and other criminals in order to shut their operation down. But the police departments are using it to basically bolster their budgets, and all it's going to take is a simple requirement that civil forfeiture cannot happen until somebody is convicted of a crime. And if you just put that little proviso in there, the abuse is going to go away.
And by attacking the person's assets before they have a chance to trial means they can't afford to be represented proper way.
Yeah, well, that's part of the scam here. And what the police will generally do is they'll come on in, they'll grab all your money because you've got too much money. We think you may be using it for nefarious purposes. And then what they'll do is they'll come back in a few weeks and say, I'll tell you what, we'll give you back half of what we took as long as you sign this agreement that you will not go public and you will not sue us in court. And most people who are desperate to get their money back will go with that deal. But, I mean, it basically reduces the police forces of the United States of America down to the level of Sir Guy of Gisborne's tax collectors riding across the countryside stealing pigs and chickens and the occasional farmer's daughter with wild, reckless abandon.
Isn't it ironic, Michael, that our own federal government would not pass its own criminal background check to buy a gun?
Yeah.
If our federal government were a person, it would be somebody you would not want to be around. You would want that person in jail for torture.
Actually, I feel that way about the government as it is right now this second. I don't want to be around them. I don't want them around me. They're not welcome into my house for tea. And, yeah, a large number of them ought to be in jail.
But one last point I want to make, I have a lot of optimism about Trump's, what he's doing. And a lot of people that I work with, I have a lot of optimism. And some of it, it may be too much or it might be unjustified, but that optimism will feed on itself and create some momentum, whether it's justified or not. And I think that's going to pull our economy out of the pits that it's in right now. I think it's just like what Reagan did with Morning in America. This is just what we needed.
Well, obviously it would be better if Americans were more optimistic about the future, because that would give them the energy to do what needs to be done to make the changes that need to be made. But right now we're dealing with a very skeptical population, made so by the obvious lies and frauds of the preceding administrations and the corporate media. So mere verbal video reassurance I don't think is going to work. I think most Americans are waiting to see something substantive done that is going to result in a healthier economy, not for the money junkies, but for the American people. And again, we are still missing that mechanism by which the accumulated wealth at the top of the pyramid is recycled back down to the bottom to keep the system going. And if that is not restored, then this economy is going to implode, and there is not a thing that Donald Trump can do about it.
Well, if it does implode, I'd rather have him at the helm than our other options. That's for darn sure.
Yeah, we'll see. And I know Donald Trump is very busy, first 100 days and everything. But I think he needs to make a point the night before he has a meeting with, like, the police to talk about civil forfeiture. Just spend 10 minutes online and really look at the issues. I think in this regard, Donald Trump did not do his due diligence, or whoever he's got checking out these issues for him did not do the due diligence. For all we know, Trump's position paper on this matter was prepared for him by one of these Obama holdovers who want to make him look bad to the American people. And the sooner that Trump and Priebus clean that White House out of all these Obama-noids, the better it's going to be.
Well, Michael, you must be reading my mind, because I was going to bring that up. I wish he were on the net more. I wish because you can tell people whether they get their news from television or radio or newspaper, and those that do research on the internet and research the issue diligently. And I wish he was more internet savvy, because he could really dig deep into these issues. And
I agree with that again, because as I was saying all during the campaign, I'm very concerned that Donald Trump's view of the world is based on what he's been seeing in corporate media. Now, he knows corporate media lied about him during the campaign, and I would say the very first time he takes a weekend off and goes out to Camp David, he needs to sit down and ask himself that question: what else has the corporate media been lying to me about all my life? And start unraveling that.
Things like one thing that gives me
Israel.
Hope, it's not. Yes, and in that there was an interview he had with Bill O'Reilly where he mentioned that when he rode in the limo with Obama to the inauguration, he asked Obama what are the top 3 concerns, and Obama's number 1 concern surprised Trump. And Bill O'Reilly pressed, and he says, "Well, it was about a military of a nation that was." And Bill O'Reilly pressed Trump to give him the name. He says, "No, I'm not going to name that place," but it surprised me that it was the problem. And I can only think that was Israel.
Well, a lot of presidents have made oblique references to the problem of Israel. When Richard Nixon was going through the whole Watergate scandal and the White House tapes were being made public, it was obvious that Nixon had a real problem with Israel tinkering with our government, and he was not very kind and polite in what, at the time, was a private discussion on the matter. Anyway, listen, Scott, need to let you go. We are now just getting word the Ninth Circuit Court has upheld the suspension of Trump's travel moratorium. So it's going to be it's on its way to the Supreme Court right now. Frankly, those judges on the appeals court bench are in violation of United States Title VIII law. They have basically set themselves above the law, and I think that everybody listening to this show needs to call their Congress critters and say, you better tell those judges to comply with the letter of the law or submit their resignations. Because it is very dangerous to have a judiciary that thinks they can override the president by ignoring and defying U.S. law. I'm going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as we reported before we went to the commercial break, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has allowed the stay on Trump's travel moratorium to stay, to continue. And this is probably going to head to the United States Supreme Court, unfortunately under the rules, because it is an 8-member court at this time. If they split along liberal-conservative lines and tie, then the lower court ruling would stand. The real issue right now is that because the borders are now wide open again to these countries that are hotbeds of terrorism, and even Syria's President Assad says they know some of the people coming from Syria to the United States are terrorists. They're going to be trying to come right now before this window is closed and the new vetting is put on in. So if there is a terror attack of any kind, we're going to blame it on that Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who simply feel that they are above the laws of the United States of America, not to mention common sense. Apparently the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals bought into this idea that this travel moratorium was specifically targeting Muslims. Because after all, that's what the corporate media is telling them every single night. I'm almost ashamed that one of the judges is from here in Hawaii. Alrighty, getting on back here. Bill Kristol, boy, you'd think he would know better than to say things where he might be recorded. Weekly Standard editor Bill Kristol was at an event put on by the American Enterprise Institute Tuesday. And he joked, I hope this thing isn't being videotaped or ever shown anywhere. Wrong, because it was. And Bill Kristol literally came on out and said, the white working class ought to be deported because the immigrants are going to be more willing to work hard. Now, his image of immigrants working hard, it goes back to the 1930s. And the Great Migration to the United States, give us your tired, your poor, and so forth and so on, where a great many immigrants did come to the United States and enjoyed a huge success. But it's a very different climate here right now. Obviously, George Soros, his hand is in here somewhere. He knows he doesn't have long to live, and he seems to be willing to spend all of his fortune to try and bring about this new world order, blur everybody together, knock down all the borders, and he doesn't care what chaos and horrors and privations it causes. I don't know if Soros has any heirs out there, but they got to be getting very, very nervous because from their point of view, if he spends all of his fortune on this push for the New World Order, there won't be anything left for them. And heirs have been known to sue parents who are behaving bizarrely and losing the family fortune to protect their interests. I actually had personal contact with one of these bizarre lawsuits at one point. Well, I got to tell you, I think the rule of law is now officially dead, courtesy of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Common sense seems to be dead, courtesy of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And I imagine that Trump is very angry, and he has every right to be. Now, interestingly enough, Israel Shamir, in an article over at Dark Moon, has come on out saying the reason Israel is fully on board with flooding Europe and the United States with Muslims is to destroy Christianity, to hopefully get the Christians and Muslims killing each other off, to leave Israel in charge of the world. It's a little out there, but I'm not willing to dismiss it out of hand at this point. Okay, we're coming up on another commercial break, and when we come on back, we're going to be talking about education and some science issues and a bunch of other really cool things like that as well. So the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there is a big stink brewing over in Illinois where the Chicago Public Schools officials sent home a letter with all 381,000 students blasting Governor Bruce Rauner and basically ignoring any role the Democrats played in the state's budget woes. And the letter basically says, "Dear parents, Governor Bruce Rauner, just like President Trump, has decided to attack those who most need the help and accuses them of cheating children by supporting school choice." And the parents have fired back, saying that they don't feel it should be the position of a publicly funded school to engage in propagandizing the children as a means to propagandize the parents. And there's been a lot of letters written to the local TV station, WGN, that was reporting on this, saying this is inappropriate. These schools are supposed to be teaching these kids job skills that will allow them to take part in our economy, not indoctrinate them to support a particular political establishment. Now, down in Virginia, there's a big stink because the schools have these posters plastered all over, which are clearly pushing political correctness, like women's rights are human rights, and parents are complaining, saying this is obviously a propaganda piece, and the Virginia School Board is saying, no, this is just history, and it's not, it's not propaganda, and this is what we're here to teach the students. Well, obviously that last one is very much true. But whatever happened to reading, writing, arithmetic, science, engineering, chemistry, physics? Now, I understand public schools have always engaged in a small amount of propaganda in between the classes for the students. That's what that whole Prussian model of public schooling was all about. But in this case, the propaganda has swelled to overwhelm the entire educational system to the point where these kids are simply not getting an education that is going to help them in life. Now, in New York City, there is a big stink because parents who are homeschooling are being reported to Child Protective Services. Now, in New York, if you want to homeschool, there's a whole paper process you have to go through, and parents who have gone through that process, dotted every I, crossed every T, are being visited by Child Protective Services under the crime of educational neglect. And it turns out what was going on was the New York City school system decided to consolidate all of the applications for homeschooling, because apparently there are a lot of them, in a single office that was understaffed, underfunded, and they're not processing the paperwork in a timely manner. So the schools go on recording the child's absence as an attendance problem, and after so many missed classes, they're reported automatically to Child Protective Services. And this is a form of harassment. The public schools have become a disaster. They're being used as indoctrination centers to the exclusion of education. The education is based on Common Core, which is itself a process of indoctrination. They've completely misrepresented the Bill of Rights to those children. And parents want out. And the public schools are saying, no, your child belongs to us. We can't let any children go. It'll reduce our funding. And so that's what's going on over there. Now, down at Texas State University, student senators recently introduced a bill that basically ended the idea of a safe space. And predictably, the snowflakes and buttercups screaming, it's detrimental, we must have our safe spaces, And it's a nationwide trend. How dare you go against the flow? But the student senators are saying, look, when these kids leave our university, they're going to have to function in the real world, where you don't get safe spaces. You don't get offense-free environments. And we have a responsibility to train these kids to live and work and function in the real world, not in this fantasyland glass bubble that they want to live in. So the student senators are absolutely right. And of course, what all this political correctness, safe space nonsense is about is an attack on freedom of speech. You cannot have freedom of speech and an offense-free environment. Because when you're telling the truth about somebody who's got something to hide or who wants to lie, they're going to come out and say, I'm offended. And the proper response ought to be offended. I don't care. Nothing happens to you when you get offended. You don't get a disease. Parts of your body don't drop off. The real world is full of things that people are going to find offensive. You need to grow a thick hide and buy a crash helmet. One clue about why these snowflakes are the way they are is revealed by a survey where apparently all of these buttercups and snowflakes and crybaby liberals that are used to fill the crowds out at all these Soros-funded left-wing rallies, it turns out 92% of them are still living at home with mother and will live with mother into adulthood. Because mother gives me a safe space. Mother will protect me. These are all Peter Pan. They don't want to grow up. They want to be protected little innocent children. Just believe what they want to believe. And that is a disservice to these kids. It's just like those student senators down in Texas are saying. The responsibility of higher education, of any education, is rightly to teach these kids, these students, how to function in the real world. If these university students graduate and they go on out into the job market, and human resources are asking them the questions about, have you had a drug conviction? What's your orientation? Or well, they can't do that when there's a law against that. What's the student going to do? I'm offended by that question. I refuse to answer. You think they're going to get a job? Employers do not want to hire anybody who's going to be a constant headache of whining and crying and, oh, my office space is uncomfortable, the coffee is too bitter, I'm offended by the calendar over in this other guy's office. They got enough problems trying to run a profitable business. By the way, last year the number of American citizens renouncing their U.S. citizenship has hit an all-time high. People are getting out while the getting is good. Now then, let's talk about the Oroville Dam spillway. This is a problem. Now, of course, the official pronouncement from California is there's no real threat. It's going to be okay. Now, first of all, you need to understand that the Oroville Dam is the tallest earthen dam in the world. It's the second largest dam on planet Earth after Aswan. And if you look at the video of the water that is flowing across the collapsed portion of the spillway, you can see on the far side of the spillway where the embankment is already starting to collapse. Because all the way down from the dam, it's all green and grass and stuff to hold the soil in place. And then when it gets to the break, it's all raw soil, fresh breaks. And when you look at the video down where the spillway is pouring out into the river, you can see a brown stain where it's contaminating. So what's going on here is the water going through that over that break is already undermining the soil from adjacent sections of the spillway and also outside the spillway on that far side by the embankment. Now, there is a little room left in the dam right now where they can shut the spillway to try and do repairs. But if that dam were to collapse, and there have been concerns about it even before the spillway broke, it would wipe out the city of Oroville. Now, behind all of this is a glaring reality that we must face, and Donald Trump's going to have to face it. The nation's infrastructure has been neglected in order to pay for all these wars. And it is all starting to fail. Not just the spillway at Oroville. The whole western irrigation system is only delivering 1/3 of the water it was originally designed and built. There are water main breaks. There are cracks in the aqueduct that are dumping huge amounts of fresh water, usable water, in places where it's not needed. And we're reaching a point where we're not going to be able to stay ahead of it. Now, Donald Trump is talking about infrastructure programs. Obviously, repairing, reinforcing dams and bridges would be a good place to start. I would strongly suggest that Donald Trump use his authority as president to order the Treasury to issue a currency for the infrastructure projects, rather than borrowing it at interest from the Federal Reserve. Simply by doing that, according to Ellen Brown, the cost of the infrastructure projects will be cut in half. That's how much the private central banks make off of any government project. By the time it's paid off years down the road, they're making more money off of the project than the people who actually do it. If you want an eye-opening exercise, get out your mortgage and look at the principal that was loaned to you, and then calculate how much interest you will pay over the term of the mortgage, usually about 30 years, and you will find out the bank makes more money off your house than the people who built it or the person who sold it to you. This compound interest over decades gives the bankers the lion's share of the wealth of the nation. That has to be brought under control. And yes, any president who stands up to the private central bankers does so at risk to life and limb. If you have not read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, it's up at the little submenu at the very top, and I advise you to read it. I've gotten emails from people all over who've read the article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, and they all say the same thing. All of a sudden, American and world history makes sense. They can see the pattern of all these events in history are not isolated occurrences. They are all part of this ongoing process of the deliberate debt enslavement of the human race by the private central bankers, and all it costs them is ink and paper and computers and the bribes to the appropriate corrupted politicians. That's it. Private central banking is not about money, it's not about banking, it is about enslavement and control. Rule by compound interest. And it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works as long as you allow yourself to be brainwashed into thinking this is the way life is supposed to be. And it isn't. Our nation started with a completely different economic system, where the government created its own money, spent it into circulation to buy what the government needed. The currency would flow through society, powering commerce without accruing any interest to a private central bank, and then was taxed back at the end in the same amount to balance the books and close the cycle. It's a wonderful system. It works really well for the nation and its people, and that's why the private central bankers hate it. And they hate it so much they're willing to assassinate leaders and start world wars to keep you their debt slaves. And behind this push for a new world order and a global government is a plan for a global private central bank to entrap the entire human race as debt slaves until the end of time, whenever we go extinct for whatever reason. And it amounts to little more than an attempt to end the idea of a republic or a democracy and reimpose feudalism as a governing model over the human race. Now, over in Kansas, somebody tried to organize a rally against campus carry, which is in the news there because of all these school shootings. The rally against campus carry drew a grand total of just 15 people. I think Americans are really fed up with all this gun grabber nonsense. Even today, we're with this immigration issue. We're always hearing we shouldn't judge all the Muslims by the few crazies. Isn't it time that gun owners got the same deal? But we don't. Anytime there's a mass shooting by somebody whose brain is melted on prescription antidepressants, what's the first thing we hear? We have to take guns away from everybody. We have to punish the law-abiding gun owners. You don't need guns. At the very least, we need guns to protect our homes against the skyrocketing crime in a nation where the average wait time for a 911 call is running about 18 minutes. What are you going to do to somebody who's breaking into your house to rape your wife and steal all your wealth? Sit down, let me make you some coffee. We got to wait 18 minutes before the cops show up. Don't think they're going to go along with that one here. All righty, we're going to grab a phone call. Gaither, I guess, in Oklahoma. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your name? On your mind?
Hello. It's Gaither, but
Gaither.
I got an idea on the infrastructure. Infrastructure deal is help the economy. Because I live out in rural Oklahoma, and everybody here has got tons of steel rotting and rusting in their yard. Have a recycle, recover our own steel, remelt it down, and build our bridges. That way, these people that have been having this stuff, it'd be worth some money. We could recover it. You know what I mean? It's just, there's a million little ways I see as I walk through life that we can help right now, bring money right now to these people that don't have any money, and then the transfer money, and then you know what I mean? I can see a recovery happening fast. We use what we have now, and we don't need bankers. We need to just get the steel price right, fire these plants up, and start recovering our own stuff and building this. What do you think?
It's a very, very good idea, and certainly during World War II, there were metal drives. Give us your excess steel and copper and so forth because they needed them for the bullets there. And again, I want to reiterate, my criticisms against private central banks do not extend to the normal depositor bank in your hometown, which collects together excess cash from the general population in the form of savings accounts and then organizes it into large masses that can be used for business development and expansion for the good of the community. That kind of bank, an honest depositor bank, is necessary and essential to a community.
But that would stimulate the local banks, you know what I mean? Because, that'd be local money these guys collect, and we just have the federal government subsidize. So, I'm sorry, Mike.
Okay, yeah, we got to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, Donald Trump has set up a vaccine safety commission. It's being chaired by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a well-respected critic of vaccines. We're already seeing the pushback. In the corporate media, there's vaccines are wonderful, vaccines are safe. You should. Amazingly enough, somebody actually bought a billboard on Interstate 40 near Amarillo, Texas, that simply says vaccines can cause autism. So we're seeing a lot of grassroots coming out of this. Now, anytime somebody tells you vaccines are safe and you shouldn't worry about them, you can always remind them of the 1976 swine flu debacle, where the vaccine killed 50 times as many people as the swine flu itself did. You can point them at the CDC data that the measles vaccine has killed more people than measles has. And more recently, there was this 2009, remember the When Pigs Fly flu pandemic. GlaxoSmithKline were selling Pandemrix vaccine all over Europe. And it triggered an epidemic of narcolepsy and cataplexy. And all of these people sued, and the government, because it had mandated these vaccines, said, well, sovereign immunity, we can't be held liable for the mistake. And apparently the courts disagreed because the High Court has rejected a government appeal to block the payments. And so now these people who were harmed by this vaccine are going to get some compensation, probably nowhere near enough. Robert F. Kennedy has come on out pointing to a team of researchers from the Yale School of Medicine and Penn State College of Medicine who have found a link between the timing of the vaccines and the onset of certain brain disorders in children, which, by the way, is a point that is made in the documentary Vaxxed, that when your kids are vaccinated is a major, major factor. The earlier the vaccines are applied, the more likely there is to be neurological damage. Now, over in India, their government has now shut down the Gates Foundation program, citing their concerns of the Gates Foundation and Bill Gates' personal fortune to big pharmaceutical companies. And with Gates out there pushing vaccines on everybody, it's time to ask, how much stock in pharmaceutical corporations does Bill and Melinda Gates own? So, story coming out of governmentslaves.info. Many people are now questioning the accuracy of food research, food safety research, due to the exposure of financial ties between the researchers and the food companies. The whole system is really corrupt. The whole system is really corrupt. These researchers own stocks in these companies. Remember what we said about CDC and vaccines. They own more than 20 patents on vaccines from which they make $4.5 billion every year. Do you think they're going to be honest in admitting that vaccines might actually cause harm? Of course not, because dollars are more important than human beings in the United States of America. All right, there's the music. It's time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, with the lovely Lady Claire in hour number 3. So until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, and aloha America.